Can you hear? The wolves are closer tonight. Maybe they smelled my successful hunt that I mentioned in the last video. A thin rabbit, but enough for a few more days. The snow hasn't stopped falling for 3 days. Look out the window. The mountains are almost impassable now, which is good. It means I'm safe, at least for now. I can feel the cold wind seeping through the cracks in this old cabin, but the fire in the fireplace keeps the room bearably warm. My leg is better thanks to the medicine that family of shepherds gave me before I went up to this refuge. It still hurts when I exert myself, but I can now walk without limping so much. The wound I suffered while escaping from the last hiding place is healing well, despite the poor conditions. For those who are seeing me for the first time, I am Father Thomas Berry, former Vatican employee, now considered a traitor for exposing the truth about the Church's financial embezzlement and the systematic silencing of victims. I had to abandon my parish, my books, my entire previous life. Every new video I record increases the risk, but I can't stop now. What I'm going to reveal today is possibly more disturbing than anything I've shared before. The wood crackles in the fire as you organize those documents. I smell the strong smell of burning pine mixed with the metallic aroma of the snow that accumulates outside. This place is rustic. Wooden walls darkened by time, an old mattress in the corner, basic survival tools. But it has served me well as a temporary refuge. 3 days ago, when the storm hit, I received a surprising delivery. Someone risked a lot to bring this package to me. A young novice, whose name I will not reveal to protect him, managed to find me through the support network I have maintained. He arrived exhausted, his lips blue from the cold, and left immediately after delivering the sealed package. "From those who still believe in the truth," was all he said. This package contains documents that should never have left the Vatican's confidential archives. Documents about something that the Church has hidden for decades. The systematic abuse against nuns in convents around the world, and even more shocking, the sophisticated institutional system created to silence those who dare to speak out. I need to be careful when showing these papers. Some names and details need to be protected, not to protect abusers, but to ensure the safety of victims who are still vulnerable to retaliation. The smoke from the fireplace makes my eyes burn as I examine these pages. Or maybe it's the tears I can't hold back as I read these accounts. Let me explain why this is so serious. When a nun breaks her silence about abuse, the Church's response is not protection or justice, it is punishment and exile. And today, you will understand why. You will learn about the official protocol with stamp and signature created specifically to discredit, isolate and silence these women. Listen, the wolves are howling again. Closer now. I always wonder if it's just wolves or if the men hunting me have already discovered my whereabouts. Every additional day that I manage to remain hidden is another day to share these truths that need to be known. Anyone who has followed me since the beginning knows that I don't do this out of revenge or resentment. I loved and still love the Church as an institution of faith. It is precisely out of love for the true teachings of Christ that I cannot remain silent in the face of what I discovered. This cabin is cold, isolated and uncomfortable, but it offers me something I lost a long time ago, the freedom to speak the truth without filters. As I organize these documents in the flickering light of the fire, I feel the weight of responsibility. These women trusted someone with their stories. This someone risked everything to document them, and now it's up to me to make sure they are heard. The first document I will show you is a statement. The paper is yellowed, the ink is a little faded, but the words carry a pain that time has not been able to erase. Before reading it, I want to ask something of you who are watching me despite the risks. This subject is painful, it is difficult, but it is necessary. Leave the word courage in the comments if you are ready to know these truths. I don't ask this for algorithms or numbers. I ask because we need to form a community of people committed to the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Your comment will show these silenced women that someone is finally willing to listen to them. Now, as the snow continues to fall outside and the wolves appear to have momentarily moved away, let's dive into this first testimony. Sister Helena, 42 years old, former nun from a convent in Italy. Her story came to me through a clandestine network of ex-nuns who support each other. His words are as powerful as they are disturbing. The smell of pine wood smoke fills every corner of this secluded cabin as the temperature outside plummets. The wolves have stayed away for now, but the silence of the mountains brings its own tension. I feel the heat of the flames on my face as I hold these documents. Papers that carry voices that have been brutally silenced. This first testimony, I need to take a deep breath before sharing it with you. Sister Helena, 42, served as a nun for nearly 2 decades at a convent in Tuscany, Italy. Your report came to me through a clandestine network of former nuns who risk everything to document these cases. She wrote it by hand on plain notebook paper, as if the act of putting these words on the congregation's official paper was a final violation she could not bear. For 7 consecutive years, I was repeatedly abused by the priest-confessor assigned to our convent. It happened during confession, in that sacred space that was supposed to be one of spiritual healing. At first, it was accidental touches, prolonged looks, inappropriate questions about my purity. Gradually, it evolved into explicit touches, requests for demonstrations of obedience in the name of God. I lived in terror, trapped between my vows of obedience and the certainty that it was deeply wrong. Do you understand the pattern? The abuse of spiritual power, the manipulation of faith as a tool of control. I continue with her story. When I finally worked up the courage to report it to Mother Superior, after an entire night of prayer and tears, her reaction broke me inside. There was no shock or indignation, just a calculating look. Sister Helena, these are very serious accusations that could destroy the reputation of a man of God. Are you sure you haven't misinterpreted his pastoral intentions? Maybe it's your own impure heart seeing sin where there is only spiritual zeal. The temperature dropped even more outside. The wind beats at the windows of this cabin like restless souls seeking justice. Helena continues. 3 days later, I was informed of my immediate transfer to an isolated convent in the Alps. Not as a pastoral decision, but explicitly as punishment for my impure thoughts and for sowing discord in the community. My things were packed up by other sisters. I didn't even get to choose what to take. The priest remained in his position, continuing as confessor to dozens of other young and vulnerable nuns. In the new convent, I was assigned to the hardest and most humiliating jobs: laundry, cleaning bathrooms, waking up hours earlier to turn on the boilers. The message was clear. I was a traitor, a liar, a temptation to evil. When I tried to write to the diocesan bishop, my letter was intercepted. I then received an official warning signed by a Monsignor of the Curia. Any attempt to defame a priest would result in canonical proceedings for slander, with possible excommunication. The fire crackles as I absorb the final words of Helena's testimony. I left the religious order after 17 years, completely destroyed, spiritually, emotionally, physically. I left with no professional qualifications, no money, no references. The church I swore to serve discarded me as an inconvenience. The worst was not the abuse, as terrible as it was. The worst was the institutional betrayal, the well-oiled machine that moved not to protect me, but to silence me and preserve my abuser. This is not an isolated case. It is not a bad apple or an unfortunate exception. I have dozens of testimonies here from every continent with almost identical patterns of abuse, silencing and retaliation. Sister Josephine, 38, South Africa. Her testimony was documented by a human rights organization and reached me through secure channels. We were 8 novices who suffered abuse from the same Monsignor who oversaw our convent. He came from Rome for quarterly spiritual retreats. The abuse was systematic, disguised as special spiritual direction. He spoke of purification through physical humiliation and total submission as the path to God. Our terror increased when one of us, Sister Claire, became pregnant. Panic in the congregation was immediate, not out of concern for her, but because of the potential scandal. Within 2 weeks, she disappeared. We were informed that he had decided to leave religious life for personal reasons. We later discovered the truth. She was secretly sent to have an abortion at a private clinic funded by the diocese, violating the church's own teachings that condemn this practice. When we finally found the courage to report collectively, all 8 of us, we were surprised by the speed of the response. In less than 48 hours, a cardinal arrived from Rome, not to investigate the Monsignor, but to advise us. He gathered us in the chapel and under the gaze of the crucified Christ told us in a soft but threatening voice, "Understand, my daughters, that no one would believe nuns against a respected Monsignor with decades of service to the church. If they persist, they will be described as mentally unstable, hysterical, seeking attention. Is this what they want in their lives?" 5 of us left the order in the following months. 3 remained, silenced by fear and spiritual manipulation. The Monsignor was quietly transferred to an administrative position at the Vatican, effectively a promotion. As the flames dance and cast shadows on the rustic walls of this cabin, I can't help but think about the shadows these abuses cast over these women's lives. Souls who dedicated everything to God, who sought only to serve, transformed into victims and then outcasts when they dared to speak the truth. But the most disturbing is yet to come, because what I discovered are not just isolated cases of abuse followed by institutional neglect. What do I have here? Takes out a folder sealed with red ribbon. Is proof of a meticulously designed, documented and implemented system to systematically silence nuns who report abuse. This document that I am about to reveal is perhaps the most damaging that has ever passed through my hands. It bears the official seal of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, the Vatican department that oversees all religious orders. It dates back to 1990, with updates in 2002 and 2014. Its innocuous title belies its true purpose: Confidential Procedures for Sensitive Situations in Women's Institutes. In simple terms, it is a detailed, step-by-step manual for silencing nuns who report abuse. The sparks from this fire rise like unanswered prayers as I prepare to share the contents of this document with you. The wolves began to howl again on the distant slopes of the mountain. The night deepens, and with it, the revelations that should never remain in the shadows. The storm is getting worse outside. I can feel the wind seeping through the cracks in this cabin, bringing a biting cold that not even the fire can completely dispel. The wolves have approached them, clearing. I can see their eyes occasionally reflecting the light escaping through the window. Natural predators, but not as dangerous as the predators that hide behind sacred robes. I take a sip of hot tea to warm my tired body. The bitter taste of herbs gathered from the sides of this mountain helps me stay focused as I prepare to share the most shocking document in this package. This is not a draft, nor a proposal, nor an unofficial document. What I have in my hands is a formal protocol, approved at the highest levels of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Note the embossed official seal, the papal tiara, and crossed keys. Note the signatures at the end, some of which I will have to hide to protect those within the system still working for reform. The title seems harmless, almost bureaucratic. Confidential Procedures for Sensitive Situations in Women's Institutes, an internal document from the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life, initially dated 1990, with updates in 2002 and 2014. The most recent updates were made after the first major sexual abuse scandals began to emerge in the global media. The preamble sets the tone with language seemingly concerned with the well-being of the Church. The sanctity of the Church and the dignity of consecrated life require maximum prudence and discretion in handling allegations potentially damaging to the credibility of the evangelizing mission. The following procedures aim to ensure that accusations are handled with justice, pastoral charity, and appropriate protection for all parties involved. Beautiful words that hide a dark purpose, as becomes evident in the initial procedures section, where I read, "When a religious woman alleges inappropriate conduct by a clergyman, the first response should be to assess the psychological stability of the complainant before any investigation of the accusation." Did you understand? The first concern is not investigating whether the accusation has merit. It is not about protecting the potential victim or preventing further abuse. It is questioning the mental health of the complainant. The document goes on to detail how this evaluation should occur. It is strongly recommended that psychological assessment be conducted by professionals approved by the competent ecclesiastical authority, preferably with experience in matters of religious life and vows. In other words, psychologists or psychiatrists selected by the accused institution itself with probable institutional bias. This section is particularly disturbing. Cases of allegations against high-ranking priests must be immediately referred to the congregation in Rome, not local authorities, and kept under strict pontifical secrecy. Pontifical secrecy is the highest level of confidentiality in the Catholic Church. Violating this confidentiality may result in automatic excommunication. Essentially, this means that a nun who reported her abuse to civil authorities or the media could be excommunicated, the harshest spiritual punishment possible. The section on pastoral management of the situation details the treatment of the nun during the process. It is recommended that the reporting nun be transferred to another community during the process, preferably in a distant region, to facilitate discretion. Isolation, removal from your support network, exile disguised as a pastoral transfer. The document continues. During this period of discernment, it is advisable to limit the religious's access to external communications that could exacerbate tensions and create unwanted publicity. Translated from bureaucratic language, control your access to phones, letters, visitors. Essentially, cut your lines of communication with the outside world. There is a particularly cynical passage about how to handle cases that begin to attract outside attention. In cases that receive outside attention, the nun may be temporarily excused from her vows to remove institutional membership during the period of heightened scrutiny. Exempting a nun from her vows, even temporarily, means that she technically ceases to be a member of the religious order. If she speaks publicly after this, she will no longer be a sister denouncing abuse within the church, but a former nun with allegations that can more easily be dismissed as resentment from someone who has left religious life. The conclusion of this protocol is revealing in its omission. All involved must be reminded of the importance of Christian forgiveness and spiritual reconciliation as the ultimate goal of any disciplinary proceeding. Nowhere in this official 18-page document is there any mention of cooperation with civil authorities in criminal cases, adequate psychological support by independent professionals for victims, material or financial reparation for those who had their vocations and lives destroyed, real and meaningful consequences for proven abusers. This next document proves that this protocol is not a dead letter or historical relic. It is in active use to this day. I have here a letter from 2018 from a cardinal whose name I need to hide, sent to a Mother Superior in Colombia. The letter makes explicit reference to the protocol. Regarding the reported situation involving sister, name omitted, we strongly recommend implementing the standard discretionary procedure CIV-CSVA Protocol 1990-2014 to resolve this sensitive matter internally. We have already contacted the Diocese of Omitted to facilitate her temporary transfer to the mission in the Amazon region, where she can reflect spiritually away from disturbing influences. The sister mentioned in this letter had reported abuse by an Episcopal visitor. His transfer to a remote mission in the Amazon was the direct application of this silencing protocol. I was able to track his whereabouts through trusted contacts. She is now in a small missionary community more than 200 kilometers from the nearest hospital, with no regular access to telephone or internet, effectively isolated from any possibility of making her voice heard. The pure white of the snow outside contrasts painfully with the darkness of these documents. These women dedicated their lives to serving God and others, and in return were not only victimized by abusers, but betrayed by the very institution they swore to serve. An institution that created, documented, and implemented a meticulous system not to protect them, but to silence them. I want you to know that exposing this is not easy for me. I spent my adult life dedicated to the church, believing in its mission. Part of me still believes. I share these truths not to destroy, but to heal, because true healing can only begin with brutal honesty about the extent of the illness. Many of you are watching in silence, perhaps shocked, perhaps skeptical. Others may recognize in these words echoes of their own experiences. They can help amplify these voices that have been silenced for so long. A simple gesture like leaving a like on this video shows that these stories are finally being heard, that these women are no longer alone. Each like is a small act of recognition that matters more than you realize. And that's just the surface. What I have below goes beyond individual cases or even this protocol. I have an internal report here compiled in 2019 by a confidential Vatican committee that has never been publicly released. Someone risked everything to include it in this package I received. The statistics it contains about the global scale of this problem are, there is no other word, devastating. I got this satellite connection at considerable cost. It's slow and unstable, especially with this storm, but necessary to verify some of the information I received. The cold makes my fingers hurt as I type, but I need to show you the true scope of what we're facing. This satellite connection is precarious. It cost a small fortune, and with each stronger gust of wind, it threatens to collapse. But it's my only link to the outside world right now, my only way of verifying the authenticity of some of these documents I've received. The cold makes my fingers stiff as I browse through the scanned files. The temperature must be close to -15 degrees outside. Even inside the cabin, my breath forms small clouds in the air. This internal report I'm about to show you should never have left the Vatican's secure servers. It was compiled in 2019 by a special commission formed at the request of Pope Francis, one of many reform initiatives he has tried to implement that have met with fierce resistance in the corridors of ecclesiastical power. The official title is Neutral, Almost Scientific, Statistical Assessment and Analysis of Allegations of Improper Conduct in Women's Institutes of Consecrated Life, 2008-2018. But what it contains is nothing short of explosive. The statistics are alarming and defy any attempt to dismiss these cases as isolated incidents. According to internal data compiled from archives of dioceses and religious congregations around the world, an estimated 18,000 to 20,000 cases of abuse against nuns have been reported domestically in the last decade globally. The report's authors note that these numbers likely represent only 30 to 40% of actual cases, considering the significant barriers to reporting. Of these documented cases, less than 3% resulted in any form of disciplinary action against the abusers. Most were resolved through transfers, short-term psychological treatments, or simply ignored after internal reviews deemed the allegations unsubstantiated. One particularly disturbing finding, 62% of complainants left their religious orders within 3 years of reporting abuse. The report's authors classify this not as voluntary choice, but as exit induced by institutional trauma. The geographic distribution reveals patterns that cannot be ignored. Africa leads with 26% of reported cases. The report specifically notes that the financial and administrative dependence of many African female congregations on male clergy creates specific vulnerabilities that facilitate systematic abuse. In simple terms, nuns in poor convents depend on priests and bishops to survive materially, creating extreme power imbalances. Latin America follows closely with 24% of cases. Here, the report highlights the geographic isolation of many female religious communities and the unquestioned cultural authority granted to clergy as aggravating factors. India and Southeast Asia account for 21% of cases, with a disturbing observation about specific vulnerabilities of novices from lower castes and socio-economic classes who face additional barriers to reporting abuse. The most disturbing aspect of this report isn't just the raw numbers, shocking as they are. It is the way in which this data is interpreted by the authors of the document themselves. This section, titled Institutional Challenges, reveals the real mindset behind the curtains. The committee identifies as a significant institutional challenge the increase in religious women willing to share their experiences publicly, bypassing established ecclesiastical channels. This trend, amplified by social media and secular women's rights organizations, represents a considerable risk to the effective management of these delicate situations. Read this sentence again. The challenge is not the abuse itself. It is not the failure to protect consecrated women. It is not impunity for abusers. The challenge identified is that victims are increasingly unwilling to remain silent, who are finding ways to make their voices heard outside of the system designed to silence them. The recommendations section is equally revealing. In view of the growing media challenges, it is recommended the creation of a special fund for strategic crisis management in women's institutes, with an emphasis on communications, consultancy, specialized legal support, and transition programs for religious women who present high risks of unauthorized public exposure. I translate for you what this means. A special fund, money from the faithful, not to support victims, not to implement effective prevention, not to guarantee justice, but to hire public relations consultants who control damage to the institution's image, lawyers who specialize in silencing victims, and transition programs, a euphemism for facilitating the departure of nuns who threaten to speak out publicly, removing them from religious life before they can cause damage to the church's reputation. This attached 2020 memorandum details the initial implementation of this fund. Note the amount allocated, €3.2 million for the first year of operation, with annual increases expected. The memo establishes a rapid response framework in 5 main languages, with intervention teams ready to deploy within 48 hours when high media risk situations arise. This excerpt specifies the resources available for priority cases, defined as allegations involving high-ranking prelates or situations with potential for international media coverage. The Gold Protocol allows for immediate mobilization of legal advisors in multiple jurisdictions, expedited psychological assessment of the whistleblower, proactive public relations, including preparation of pre-approved alternative narratives, and when necessary, one-time financial offers, conditioned on comprehensive confidentiality agreements. The snow falling silently outside reminds me of the purity and dedication of these women when they entered religious life. Young people who gave everything, their bodies, minds, futures, to the service of God and humanity. A purity violated not only by direct abusers, but betrayed by the institution that swore to protect them. This map is part of the report and shows something particularly disturbing, so-called priority relocation. Centers, specific locations in remote areas where nuns who pose risks of exposure can be quickly transferred. Note the concentration of these points in regions with limited communication infrastructure, restricted access to international media, and strong religious institutional control. Remote areas of the Brazilian Amazon, interior of Central Africa, isolated provinces of the Philippines, mountains of Peru. This point represents a convent in the mountains of Chiapas, Mexico. According to the attached document, this location received 9 high-risk nuns between 2018 and 2020. High risk does not mean they posed a danger to anyone. It means their testimonies posed a risk to the institutional reputation. This convent is 4 hours from the nearest city, with no reliable internet or telephone connection. Perfect isolation. The cost-benefit analysis is frankly disturbing. This chart compares the estimated financial and reputational costs of different approaches. The option of full transparency and systemic reform is dismissed as financially unfeasible due to the potential costs of litigation and compensation to victims. Instead, the recommended approach is strategic individual case management, translating dealing with each case in isolation, minimizing systemic connections, and avoiding liability precedents. It appears someone is trying to trace this connection. I need to be quick now. Before closing, I want to show you one last piece of information from this report. The report's conclusion contains these startlingly honest words. The committee recognizes that the current response to allegations at women's colleges prioritizes the protection of institutional reputation over the well-being of complainants in approximately 93% of cases reviewed. This approach, while effective in mitigating immediate harm to public image, presents significant long-term risks, especially considering cultural and technological changes that facilitate the dissemination of previously contained information. In other words, the system recognizes that it is prioritizing reputation over justice in 93% of cases, and its main concern is not the human cost of this approach, but the risk that the world will eventually discover the truth. As I absorb the impact of these cold numbers and graphs, I can't help but think about the real people behind these statistics. Each dot on that map represents a woman who dedicated her life to serving God and others, only to be abused, silenced, and exiled when she sought justice. The flames of the fireplace dance before me, casting restless shadows on the walls of this isolated cabin. Statistics are easy to ignore, but the individual stories, the real lives affected by this system, are impossible to forget once we know them. And that's precisely what I want to share now. The most shocking cases I've received. Cases that reveal not just individual abuses, but structured systems of exploitation in different parts of the world. Stories that give faces and names to the cold statistics I just showed. As the night progresses and the cold intensifies on this isolated mountain, I need to share the most disturbing cases I have received. Cases that go beyond individual abuse and reveal structured systems of exploitation and silencing. My hands shake as I leaf through these pages, partly from the bone-deep cold, partly from the gravity of these stories I have meticulously documented. India, Kerala, 2012-2018. A case that began with the complaint of a single courageous nun and revealed a pattern of systematic abuse involving 37 nuns from a congregation dedicated to educating girls. The smell of wood burning in the fireplace reminds me of the incense present in the details of this account. The abuser, a prominent bishop, often used religious rituals as a pretext for private meetings. Sister Anupama wrote, "He would come for special blessings on Wednesdays. Mother Superior would send one of us to attend the ceremony, always alone. At first it was just comments, then touching, then the worst happened. When finally 5 of us worked up the courage to formally report it, the response was immediate, but not as we expected. What happened next reveals the sophistication of this silencing system. All 5 nuns who made the formal complaint were ordered to undergo psychological evaluations, not with independent therapists, but with a psychiatrist specifically designated by the diocese. This document shows a medical form with an official header, reveals that all 5 received variations of the same diagnosis: shared delusional disorder, stress-induced hysteria, borderline personality with mythomaniacal tendencies. Very serious diagnoses without any adequate clinical evaluation. Sister Anupama continues, "2 of us were forcibly dosed with powerful antipsychotics that left us dizzy, unable to articulate coherent thoughts. Sister Josephine was admitted for 3 weeks to a nursing home run by the diocese itself. When she returned, she was unrecognizable, a zombie who could barely hold a conversation. The case only became public when Sister Nina, the youngest of the group, managed to smuggle a cell phone and contact a local journalist. The institutional response was swift and relentless. In less than 72 hours, all 37 nuns at the convent received transfer orders. Here's the most disturbing thing: strategic dispersion. The 5 main whistleblowers were sent to 5 different countries: the Philippines, Uganda, Argentina, Canada, and a remote mission in northeast India. The others were spread across 19 different convents. A forced diaspora that effectively destroyed their ability to collectively witness or corroborate each other's stories. The bishop in question was temporarily removed only when the international media began covering the case, but even then, with administrative leave status and full salary. The canonical case against him remains ongoing 4 years later with no conclusion in sight. Democratic Republic of the Congo, 2016. This case is especially heartbreaking because it involved not just silencing, but the complete destruction of an entire community. A convent with 23 nuns from the Order of the Sisters of the Savior, dedicated to medical work in a region devastated by conflict. The report documents systematic abuse during mandatory spiritual retreats led by a group of priests linked to the local bishop. The retreats took place quarterly, always in an isolated center owned by the diocese. The priests always arrived at night. They called one of us at a time for spiritual direction. We learned to recognize the sisters' returning look: downcast eyes, stiff movements, silence. No one talked about it the next day until Sister Therese, our head nurse, gathered up the courage after finding out she was pregnant. Sister Therese's pregnancy catalyzed a collective response. The 23 nuns, led by the Mother Superior herself, who had also been a victim, documented the abuse and sent a detailed report directly to the Apostolic Nuncio, papal ambassador, in the country. The answer? Less than a month later, the entire congregation was suddenly closed due to financial unviability. Despite running a hospital that served more than 45,000 people a year and receiving stable funding from international organizations. This official statement, with the episcopal seal and signature, describes the dissolution as a necessary pastoral reorganization and orders that the nuns be distributed among 14 different congregations in 7 African countries. Most sinister, 5 of the key leaders, including Sister Therese, were sent for spiritual reorientation in isolated locations. Spiritual reorientation is another institutional euphemism. Through contacts at the African Conference of Men and Women Religious, I discovered that this term often means confinement in remote facilities with strict prayer regimes. enforced silence, and often medicinal intervention to calm troubled spirits. The case never reached the international media. The hospital was transferred to direct administration by the diocese, and the abuses were completely covered up. The vital work these nuns carried out was interrupted, the community dispersed, and the victims isolated from each other, all to protect the abusers and the reputation of the institution. Chile, 2008-2021. This case is notable for the longevity of the system of abuse and the sophistication of the structure that protected it. A detailed document compiled by a former nun who worked in the provincial administration reveals a structured system in several convents where young nuns, especially novices, were regularly summoned for individual spiritual counseling with certain clergy. This diagram, drawn by the complainant, illustrates how the system worked. Mother superiors of 5 convents identified novices considered spiritually promising, generally the youngest, most vulnerable, often from poor families or rural areas. These young women were then assigned to special formation sessions with selected spiritual directors, all of them priests with direct connections to the Archbishop. The report documents how those who resisted were punished with degrading tasks, deprivation of basic needs such as adequate heat or full rations of food, and forced social isolation within the community. Some were sent to houses of reflection, isolated facilities where they spent weeks under strict regimes of silence and penance. This system of abuse persisted for more than a decade until 2019, when a courageous nun, Sister Teresa Valdez, managed to secretly document meetings and conversations, eventually sending evidence outside the institution. The method Sister Teresa used reveals the desperation of the victims. She sewed a small recording device inside their scapula, part of the religious habit that covers the chest. For months, he risked everything to collect evidence. When he finally sent the material to a human rights lawyer through his secular sister, his plan was discovered. This is Sister Teresa today. Following the complaint, she was declared mentally unstable and placed under what the church calls special supervision, effectively house arrest in an isolated wing of an elderly convent. I got this recent photo through an underground support network. His eyes show the price of breaking the silence. The most disturbing thing about these cases is not the horrific details of the individual abuses, horrific as they are. It is the consistent pattern of institutional response. Protect abusers, silence victims, disperse witnesses, and above all, preserve the institution's reputation at any human cost. These women dedicated their lives to serving God and others. Many came from poor families, seeing religious life as an opportunity for education and meaningful purpose. In return, they were betrayed twice. First by their abusers, then by the system that was supposed to protect them. The darkness outside seems to reflect the darkness of these reports. But even on the darkest nights, there are stars, points of light that offer guidance and hope. And that's what I want to share with you now. Subscribe to this channel to follow the next videos in this series. Each new person who hears these stories represents a light being turned on in the shadows, a witness to the truth these women have been prevented from sharing. Your subscription gives me the courage to continue this perilous journey, knowing that these revelations are not disappearing into the void, but finding ears and hearts willing to confront difficult truths. As I feed this fire that keeps the chill of the night at bay, I want to share something I discovered that brings a spark of hope. Just like these sparks rising up the chimney of this rustic cabin, there is a movement growing in the shadows, an organized resistance from within the church itself. Not everything in this package I received is gloomy. Among these disturbing documents, I found evidence of something extraordinary. Clandestine support networks among nuns, ex-nuns, and some allied clergy, secretly working to change the system from within. Let me show you what I discovered about the Veronica Network and the Alianza Santa Scholastica, groups that operate in the shadows to protect victims and document abuse, creating small pockets of resistance within a system designed to silence and oppress. Just like these sparks rising up the chimney of this rustic cabin, briefly illuminating the darkness around you, there is hope rising from the ashes of this dire situation. The same shadows that hid abuse for so long now shelter something unexpected, networks of resistance and solidarity growing silently within the church itself. This folder arrived separately from the official documents. It was delivered personally by a former nun who risked her safety to ensure that I received not only evidence of abuse, but also evidence of resistance. The symbol embroidered on the cover represents Veronica, the woman who, according to tradition, cleaned Jesus' face during his journey to crucifixion, an act of compassion and courage in the midst of suffering. These documents reveal something extraordinary: the existence of clandestine support networks between nuns, ex-nuns, and some allied clergy, secretly working to change the system from the inside out. The Veronica Network, named after the woman who wiped Jesus' face, operates in more than 40 countries. It started in 2003 with just 5 former nuns in Italy and has grown into an underground organization with cells on 4 continents. This map uses an elaborate coding system to protect the identity of its members. Each dot represents not an individual, but a cell of 3 to 7 people. The colors indicate different functions: red for emergency response, blue for case, documentation, green for psychological support, yellow for safe contact points. What they do is extraordinary and risky. They maintain secret telephone helplines, using indirect numbering systems and codes to avoid detection. They established escape routes for nuns in situations of abuse, safe ways out of convents, temporary shelters, contacts for legal and psychological support. They meticulously document cases, creating a parallel archive that they one day hope to use for accountability. This internal report from Rede Veronica shows that they have managed to help more than 900 nuns in the last 5 years. Help ranges from support to leave their religious orders with dignity, to legal assistance for those seeking justice. In extreme cases, they provided new identities and relocation for women threatened for speaking out against powerful abusers. A particularly moving passage from this report describes the network's mission is not just rescue, but restoration. It is not enough to remove a sister from an abusive situation. We must help her rebuild her identity and spirituality after the betrayal of the institution she served. This is the deepest wound, not just physical or psychological abuse, but spiritual betrayal. The strong aroma of burning pine resin brings back memories of my own spiritual formation. The purity and idealism with which I entered seminary so many years ago. These women of Rede Veronica fight not only against individual abusers, but to recover the original essence of their vocation. As one wrote, "We have not left the church. The abusive institution has abandoned the teachings of Christ. We are fighting to bring the church back to its founding principles." The Alianza Santa Scholastica, named after Saint Benedict's twin sister, operates differently. While Rede Veronica focuses on rescue and direct support, the Alliance works within the system for institutional change. Founded by a group of nuns with administrative positions, it focuses on identifying allies in positions of influence and works strategically to promote them, while documenting abuses to use as leverage in critical moments. This letter from an anonymous nun who works in the Vatican administration reveals that there are resistance cells, even in the corridors of power in Rome. People who risk everything to pass on information, protect victims, and slowly change policies from within. She writes, We are like the first Christians in the catacombs, hidden but determined. In meetings, we identify each other by small signs. A specific quote from Teresa of Avila, a question about Saint Scholastica. We exchange information in empty confessionals, in sparsely frequented libraries, during seemingly casual walks in the Vatican gardens. Each small victory, an abuser quietly removed, a policy slightly reworked, a victim secretly compensated, is celebrated in silence. The Alliance has developed a sophisticated long-term influence strategy. They identified key positions within the hierarchy that control appointments, transfers, and ecclesiastical discipline. For each position, they mapped current occupants as allies, neutrals, or obstacles. With decades of patience, they work to ensure that when positions become vacant, allies are positioned to fill them. This document lists small victories over the past 8 years, the quiet review of procedures at 3 religious congregations to include external evaluation of allegations, the strategic removal of 5 known obstacles from supervisory positions over convents, the insertion of more protective language in formation documents for novices. The numbers are encouraging. 64 abused nuns were quietly transferred to safe communities without punishment. 28 abusive priests were removed from positions of contact with nuns. 17 superiors who facilitated abuse were replaced during apparently administrative reorganizations. Small victories that, when added together, begin to create islands of security in the ocean of vulnerability. The third resistance network is perhaps the most surprising. The Confessors, a small but influential group of priests and some bishops who have secretly pledged to believe and support nuns who report abuse. It started with just 3 priests in Rome in 2010 and now has almost 60 members in strategic positions. We recognize our collective complicity in the silence that enabled these abuses. As men within a patriarchal system, we benefit from privileges that we have never adequately questioned. We commit to using these same privileges now to protect our sisters in Christ, to amplify their voices when silenced, and to confront our brothers who abuse their power. This photograph was taken during a secret retreat in 2019. Faces were deliberately blurred to protect identities. For 3 days, these clergy shared information, coordinated strategies, and strengthened their collective commitment. One of them later wrote, "We leave here with the moral clarity of the first apostles, determined to live the true gospel, not the distorted version that protects abusers." Like this blizzard outside, change begins with tiny flakes, almost invisible when viewed individually. Each act of resistance may seem insignificant given the immensity of the problem. Every nun protected, every abuser removed, every policy overhauled is just a snowflake. But together, they are gradually transforming the landscape. This report from Rita Veronica shows encouraging trends. A 27% increase in the number of nuns willing to report abuse in the last 3 years. A 42% growth in community support for survivors, a measurable reduction in the time between complaints and concrete actions in dioceses where allies occupy strategic positions. This little pin shows a small metal brooch with a stylized veil, is the secret symbol of the Veronica network. Discreet enough to be used publicly without raising suspicion, but recognizable to network members. It was sent to me as a token of gratitude for amplifying these voices and as a reminder that I am not alone in this fight for truth. The hope that these networks of resistance bring me is like this fire in the fireplace, a vital warmth amid the relentless cold of the reality I have documented. These men and women risk everything, their careers, their reputations, in some cases even their physical safety, to create change from within. The stories of abused and silenced nuns are devastating, but the existence of these clandestine networks proves that the spirit of the true gospel, compassion, justice, human dignity, survives on the margins, even when betrayed by the center of power. I'm adding new secure contacts to this notebook as we speak. If you are a religious woman in an abusive situation or know someone who is, know that you are not alone. There are people working in the shadows to create paths of escape and healing. In the description of this video, I will leave safe ways to contact these networks. Dawn approaches. The wolves are silent now, perhaps sheltered from the storm like me. My leg hurts less today, but my heart is still heavy with what I discovered. Not only the horrors of abuse and the silencing system, but also the extraordinary courage of those who resist. The snow transformed the landscape outside into something completely new. This is how real change happens, not all at once, but gradually, until one day we wake up and realize that the ground beneath our feet is unrecognizable compared to what it was before. What do we do with this truth now? How can we support these resistance networks and the survivors they protect? What does real accountability mean in an institution with centuries of entrenched hierarchy? These are the questions we need to face together. I am not revealing this to destroy the church, but to save it from itself. An institution founded on the teachings of a man who deeply valued and respected women cannot continue to allow and cover up abuse against them. What we must demand is simple and impossible to argue against: an independent reporting system that does not pass through the clerical hierarchy, allowing nuns to report abuse without fear of retaliation. Immediate end to the practice of transferring whistleblowers to isolate and silence them. Full cooperation with civil authorities in cases of criminal abuse, with no exceptions based on ecclesiastical status, and genuine psychological and financial support for survivors. Dawn approaches. The wolves are silent now. I look out the window and see the sky starting to lighten on the horizon. It's not yet sunrise, but that bluish light that precedes dawn. This moment between night and day has always felt sacred to me. A liminal space where the truth seems clearest. My leg hurts less today, the pastor's medicine finally taking effect. But my heart is still heavy with what I discovered. Not just the horrors of abuse and the silencing system, but also the urgency of turning knowledge into action. I am not revealing all this to destroy the church, but to save it from itself. An institution founded on the teachings of a man who deeply valued and respected women, who challenged the power hierarchies of his time, cannot continue to allow and cover up abuses against the most vulnerable. Christ drove the merchants out of the temple with a whip of ropes. Imagine your reaction to discovering abusers sheltered in the hallowed halls, while their victims are exiled and silenced. What we must demand is simple and impossible to argue against, even by the most conservative interpretation of Catholic doctrine. First, a genuinely independent reporting system that does not pass through the clerical hierarchy, allowing nuns to report abuse without fear of retaliation. This system would need to be administered by qualified lay people, including professionals with expertise in trauma, human rights, and forensic investigation. The evidence I have presented tonight proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the current system of reporting abuse through the chain of command is fundamentally flawed. When a nun needs to report abuse first to her superior, who then reports to the local bishop, who then decides whether the case deserves to be elevated to the congregation in Rome, each level represents an opportunity for silencing and obstruction. Second, an immediate end to the practice of transferring whistleblowers to isolate and silence them. As we have seen in the cases documented tonight, the transfer of nuns who report abuse to remote or isolated locations is a systematic silencing tactic. In no moral universe can this be justified as pastoral care or spiritual discernment. It is punishment, pure and simple, applied not to the perpetrators, but to the victims. Third, full and immediate cooperation with civil authorities in cases of criminal abuse without exceptions based on ecclesiastical status. The notion that the church must handle abuse cases internally belongs to a bygone era. In 2023, any institution that protects criminals from due process becomes complicit in their crimes. This is even more true for an institution that claims to represent universal moral values. Fourth, genuine psychological, financial, and social support for survivors, especially for those who left their religious orders after abuse. These women often emerge without recognized professional qualifications, without financial resources, without close family to support them, and carrying deep trauma, not just from the original abuse, but from the institutional betrayal that followed. Fifth, a truly independent commission to review the history of nun transfers over the past 30 years, identifying suspicious patterns that could indicate covert cases of abuse. As we saw in the strategic dispersal of the convent in Kerala and the sudden closure of the congregation in Congo, the transfer or dispersal of large groups of nuns often signals an institutional cover-up. If you are a religious woman currently experiencing abuse or know someone who is, know that there are resources. In the description of this video, I have coded contact information for the support networks I mentioned: Rede Veronica, Alianza Santa Escolástica, and Os Confessores. They have protocols for secure communication and contingency plans for emergency situations. It could be as simple as visiting a public library and sending an email to a seemingly innocuous address with a specific phrase in the subject line, looking for information about Santa Veronica, which will alert the network without arousing suspicion. Or it may involve more complex codes for higher risk situations. But the important thing is to know that you are not alone, that there are escape routes, that there are people willing to help. For journalists watching, I have more detailed documentation to share. Evidence that can be independently verified, dates, names, specific locations. But I need to be sure of your discretion and commitment to protecting victims. The secure email listed in the description with the subject "Historical Research on Women's Congregations" will alert me to your interest. I will respond with protocols for secure communication. To members of the clergy who know the truth but are afraid to speak out, remember, your silence does not protect the church. It protects abusers and further damages the institution you are sworn to serve. True, faithfulness sometimes requires the painful act of confronting internal corruption. "The truth shall set you free" is not just a nice verse to quote in homilies. It is a call to action, especially when the truth is inconvenient and threatening to established power. In the next broadcast, if I can keep myself safe, I will reveal perhaps the most shocking document of all: the official list of convents discreetly designated as rehabilitation sites. In effect, internal detention facilities for nuns who dared to speak out. I have here with me the location of 12 of these convents in 9 countries, with details about their internal regimes, isolation protocols, and use of forced medication under the euphemism of spiritual stabilization treatment. I will also show evidence of a system of transnational relocation of abusers, how priests and bishops with a documented history of abusing religious women are strategically transferred to regions with less media scrutiny and greater cultural deference to clerical authority. It is a global pattern that repeats itself with disturbing precision, indicating centralized coordination. This dawn reminds me that darkness, no matter how deep it may seem, always gives way to light eventually. It may be a gradual process. First the shades of blue, then the pink on the horizon, finally the sun itself. But it is inevitable. Likewise, these truths are emerging slowly, inexorably, despite decades of efforts to keep them in the shadows. The air is sharp, crystal clear, purified by the previous night's snowfall. The surrounding mountains are covered in a pristine white blanket. This landscape reminds me of what the church could be, should be, in its purest form, a refuge of truth, justice, and compassion. It is out of love for this vision that I take the risks of speaking out. If you've followed along this far, I appreciate your courage in facing these difficult truths. It is not easy to confront the shadow within institutions we love, which have shaped our faith and identity, but it is precisely because we love these institutions that we must demand that they live up to their professed values. If you believe these women deserve justice, leave a truth in the comments. If you want total transparency in the church, write light in the shadows. Your comments are not just expressions of support, they are public declarations that these stories matter, that these women matter, that the truth matters, even when it is painful. The wolves are out there, both the animals and the humans that hunt me. I hear them sometimes, circling this isolated cabin, waiting for the right moment to attack. But as these brave nuns show us, sometimes it's necessary to stand up to our predators to protect the most vulnerable. Fear is natural. I feel it every day, but it cannot paralyze us. I need to complete this transmission now. The satellite connection has already lasted longer than would be prudent. Soon, I will need to change my location again. The footprints in the fresh snow would be too many clues for anyone looking for me. But before I leave, I want you to know, I will continue this mission as long as I can. These silenced women deserve to have their stories told, and I will do my best to be their voice. The sun now completely illuminates the valley below, turning the snow into a shimmering blanket of diamonds. A new day, a new opportunity for the truth to prevail. Pray for me as I pray for you, and especially for these brave women, those who have already spoken and paid the price, and those who still live in forced silence, waiting for the moment to finally be heard. Remember, the truth, no matter how painful it may be, is the first step to healing. I pray to God that you stay well, and I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, keep these women in your hearts and prayers. And remember that true faith never fears the truth. It embraces it, even when it hurts, even when it challenges. The comfort of what we thought we knew.